This is David Stern, and I'm going to be on the Mike Wise podcast on Pure Hoops Media. And say hello to Bruce Bernstein for me.
Welcome to part 2 of the David Stern interview on the Mike Wise Show. If you missed last week's part 1, you really need to go back and listen to it. Even if you haven't heard it yet, you'll enjoy today's show.
The Mike Wise Show is a presentation of Pure Hoops Media.
Now you're selling the league overseas. At what point do you understand, like, the dream team becomes a reality? Is it before that or after that where you think to yourself, this thing can become a global phenomenon?
It was actually before that. It was we traveled to what was then the Soviet Union with the Atlanta Hawks in 1988, and we played games in Tbilisi, the capital of Soviet Georgia. We played a game in Moscow, and we played a game in Lithuania, Vilnius. And I guess two things happened then. Number one, in Soviet Georgia, the largest applause at the introductions was for Spud Webb. And
the little guy.
What's going on? Well, it turns out that there were pirated tapes that were playing on Turkish television, and people were either getting it or getting the tapes from Turkish television. I don't remember which one. And they were watching the slam dunk contest in Dallas. And I guess it was 86 or 87, I can't remember exactly.
Which 5'6" Spud Webb won.
Right, okay. And so, that's interesting. And then we went on to Lithuania, and we went to Kaunas. And Kaunas is like the Indiana of the former Soviet Union. It's a basketball country. That's where Šarūnas was from.
Yeah, Šarūnas Marčiulionis.
That's where Arvydas Sabonis was from. And we sit down, we exchange pleasantries, give gifts and things like that. And assembled is the mayor, the head of the local basketball federation, the head of the National Federation of Lithuania, the head of the Communist Party of the region, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And after we get rid of every part of the conversation, they want to know whether I think it's fair that Sabonis is on the Portland draft list, but they don't have room under the cap to sign him.
Wow. So these guys who had pledged their lives to the system and they want to know if Arvydas Sabonis is ever going to get a chance in the greatest league known to man.
And by the way, it isn't so much that they pledged their lives, because we should have known in Soviet
breakup.
In Soviet Georgia, they booed the Russian national team. And so you begin to get a sense of what's going on there. And our players, like Šarūnas, we used to say, I'm not Russian, I'm Lithuanian. Even though it was formally still the Soviet Union, but people called it Russia. And the Lithuanians denied that they were Russians and they wouldn't speak Russian.
So now
I got it. I saw it, and then we took the Celtics to Spain in '88.
Real Madrid, I remember.
Yeah, and we still have the footage, or at least a tape of Johnny Most. This guy passes it to the guy with the beard, and the guy with the beard passes it to the guy whose name
the guy with the beard. The guy.
Yeah. And actually, it was Vlade Divac, I think, playing for I can't remember, Partizan from Belgrade.
Yeah,
it was and the place was packed, and so I don't remember when we took the Bulls to Paris. Michael Jordan was a sensation walking through the streets with his beret on. And I was watching the game with the president of the French Republic. I don't remember his name. It wasn't like Jacques Chirac.
Was it Mitterrand or no?
No. It was another gentleman who, if he wasn't the president, he was the prime minister. They flipped back and forth.
French.
And he said, I'd like to go into the locker room. I said, oh, that's great, after the game. I said, would you like to see Michael? He said, no, I'd like to meet Dennis Rodman.
The French, the
that's
president of the French
knew.
Republic wants to.
That's when I knew that we were definitely going to be an international sport. So it's, and another story often told. I was in China. We went to Xi'an to see the terracotta soldiers, and our overall guide had arranged for a local guide, and the local guide knew that I was somehow involved with the NBA, and she told our guide, the main guide, that she was a great fan of the red oxen. And our guide said she doesn't even know the difference between an oxen and a bull. Okay, that was it. So here we go.
She was a fan of the bulls.
She was a fan of the bulls, the red oxen.
The red oxen.
And so it was really quite remarkable around all of it. And that was before the Dream Team as well.
And I think at that point, as the media sort of picked up on this global fascination, the not xenophobes, I would say, but many of us were sort of like, hey, is David Stern more interested in selling T-shirts in China than he is the domestic product, which is now #1, and let's isolate these guys. And irrespective of whether that was fair or unfair, there was a conscious decision on the NBA's part to. What year did you actually go into business, I guess, with China?
Well, we went into business in China, not with China, in around 90. You know, it gets pegged at different years, but I think it was 90 when years before Abe Poland had taken the Bullets to China, or maybe even Larry Fleischer, the head of the union, had taken a pickup team to play in China. But in 1990 or thereabouts, we gave CCTV, China Central Television, tapes of our games to play on Chinese television. So I'll put it at or about 1990, and we told them we'd split the advertising revenue with them, and I sent them checks even though we couldn't sell anything. Just because
you knew that the exposure was enough.
That's the way. If you can get people following your game and your stars on television, you can do it.
Oh, my favorite story is the guy from Argentina. You know him, Adrian. He walks into your office and he says, I wanted to put tapes of the NBA on in Argentina, and I know that people won't watch them because we love Maradona and soccer, but this is. And you sold them the rights to these tapes for $1,000.
Did we get that much?
Yeah, you got $1,000. And this guy starts showing these tapes, and then I'm at the finals, and he's telling me the story, and Manu Ginobili looks at me and he goes, "Yeah, and because Adrian put those videos on, I didn't want to be the next Maradona. I wanted to be the next Michael Jordan." And he had a poster of Michael Jordan above his bed as a boy, and. That's, that to me is the NBA right there.
Adrian writes to me occasionally. He lives in Chicago, I believe.
Oh, he does? Yeah, okay.
And we got different aficionados to follow, like George Eddy, who was the announcer of our games in France, in terrible French, apparently, at least as he's told me. But he pushed us, and we found sort of interesting people. We actually got into Italy through Marco Bogarelli, Marco and Bruno brothers, and they came in one day to buy games. And I said, "How much did CBS charge you?" They said $5,000 a game. I said, "That's our price too, then." And we were in business.
The notion of
in Italy. There you were.
Yeah, it was almost like, in many ways, I look at it as in a metaphorical sense, is you're the guy at Costco giving samples of the black bean dip, and it's so dang good, people are going to buy it.
No, it's and we used to just send tapes, and so like in Saudi Arabia, there was a request that Aramco, the oil company, had a lot of expats working at it. And I said to our guys, just send them last year's Celtic Lakers. That's a great one, or something like that.
Yeah.
It's a year old, but so what? And that was at a time when the radical change hadn't occurred yet. It used to be that the only newspapers that you read were the Herald Tribune, International Herald Tribune. Then later came the USA Today.
Yep.
But you know, it didn't matter. You didn't get current news. That was before satellite delivery, before the internet, before lots of stuff.
Were you battling, we never wrote about it at the time, but were you battling the same thing that Adam is now, that you're going into these countries, you've got a business proposition, it's obviously good business for the league, yet some of these countries don't reflect the values of American democracy, and China being first and foremost? How do you square that? Do you just say to yourself, like, at some point we're going to have to face this, or we're going to have to look the other way? What do you, as a commissioner, what do you
actually
do?
Neither, because we thought that basketball rose above it. One of the photos on my wall that I'm proudest of is we visited South Africa in '93, and Nelson Mandela said that he believed that basketball could bring people together.
And this is the year before apartheid ends.
Yes, and he lived it and it was documented in the movie Invictus.
Yep.
Where he supported the essentially, mostly, virtually all
white rugby team
to bring people together.
Yeah.
And and so there you are. I know I'm watching now the U.S. government, the country itself, is negotiating with the Chinese to get them to buy $50 billion worth of pork bellies and agricultural products.
Yeah, no, we're...
So how does... So
no, I know, I don't... But
how do you... why are you sort of splintering it to focus on one aspect of it as a country? It's part of our official policy to sell goods to China.
I agree. I also think that wasn't it unsettling to see the recent controversy where at one point Adam realizing and the league realizing we could cost ourselves billions of dollars if not appease the Chinese government, at least make them look like Daryl Morey's tweet was idiotic, and then within a day it's sort of like, wait a minute, what are we doing? Was that unsettling at all to you, or no?
Was that what to me?
Was it unsettling? I mean, just to see the about face that the NBA did. And
no, I don't think they did an about face. I'm actually one of those people who read their first statement, and there was nothing that needed an about face. It affirmed the right of free expression in this country.
But you had people like James Harden and others basically saying that, criticizing the general manager for putting it out there.
That's up to them, but I just know that Adam handled it, I thought, perfectly.
He handled it perfectly.
Yeah.
Do you think that this is just part of the, as you said, this is part of the landscape? India has its own human rights issues.
Everybody has their own human rights issue.
Wow, but... let's look at China. Forget about Hong Kong.
Let's look at India, where I think it's a great potential market, but there are issues between Muslims and Hindus. Let's look at Hungary, which has been a good NBA market. Mr. Orban is becoming increasingly autocratic. We've had a number of great players from Turkey, and the focus of the government is changing.
I don't think that. I think you're right, and
But I don't know. I don't know what the outcome is. I mean, maybe at some point the NBA will make some, value judgment. But I think what we have to do is follow the dictates of the U.S. government, and if they tell, as Adam has been quoted as saying, if they tell him to withdraw, then he'll withdraw. While I don't know whether that comes before or after they asked the Chinese to buy the pork bellies. Okay,
I get that.
Know.
But it just seems to me it's because the NBA is so, as I said in the beginning, progressive socially, like maybe it's. You're right. It's splitting hairs.
Mike Wise is tongue-tied.
I'm not tongue-tied at all.
It's a brain-splitting notion, and it's an interesting notion to me.
But you can't wait for the U.S. government to tell you what's right. Forget about Hong Kong. They don't
you
have free press.
You do what's right by your own lights.
Okay.
But I guess if the government were to be so exercised that they were directing all American businesses to withdraw, then I think all American businesses would likely withdraw. But the U.S. government is of a split personality. On the one hand, they send the vice president out to have opinions, and on the other hand, the official policy of the government is to sell pork bellies to Chinese. I don't understand what's going on here. And it's fascinating to me to watch and to try to dope it out. But the one thing I'm proud of is Adam has taken a principled stand.
Yeah.
And he obviously...
Irrespective of the money it's going to cost the NBA over there.
Whatever it is. And in fact, he can't control the voices, nor would he control the voices of individual players of anything they want to say. So James Harden is free to say whatever he wants to say, as is Daryl Morey.
Are you going to talk about the human rights violations in the NBA office while you were commissioner? The atrocities you committed?
Yeah, usually. Just telling people. Actually, it's interesting. We have our own lock on freedom of expression when we tell coaches they can't criticize officials. Think about that.
Well, you get fined, and that's rules of the game. But
what
it's
do you mean
not
by
a
rules
that's
of
a
the game.
But that's a private business. That's not a country.
Well,
that's
yes, that's right.
Okay,
that's correct.
So, but I guess do you if you had to you said your biggest success that you're most proud of is giving these guys a Q rating and increasing the celebrity like you never have. Or is there anything else that really stands out that you're really happy about?
Well, I would say that's at the top of it. The fact that these players are recognized as upstanding members of their communities, the fact that they're charitably inclined. When I see what they've done in their foundations, in their day-to-day living, there's been a real change, and it's great.
Do you think that if there was a regret or a strong regret you had that you wished you'd either dealt with better, what would it be?
Well, in an interesting way, number one, I think that anytime you have a lockout or a strike, it's a failure of types. But number two, I was a little bit easy on coaches.
Really?
When they began, like Phil Jackson and Pat Riley, anytime one lost a playoff game to the other, they would invoke, the league office wanted us to go this way or that way. And I probably should have suspended them.
They were accusing you of basically fixing.
Well, aside from that, they were feeding the notion to our fans that there was something less than up and up about the officiating.
Yeah.
And the
Tim Donaghy thing was one of the you were bothered by that like few things.
Well, it's kind of interesting to be sitting in your office when the FBI comes in to tell you have a referee that's betting on games. That's like, holy Moses. But the coaches, and I used to write it off or laugh it off and say, listen, if you're not crazy when you become a coach, you get to be crazy.
Yeah.
And at playoff times, the moon gets full and these guys are baying at it. And so I said, okay, I'll move on, maybe slap a fine or something. But I think that contributed to the notion that refereeing was a problem. And it's interesting to note that Adam has worked very hard on systematic approaches to refereeing, but he still hasn't stamped out the sort of the easy statement that it's easy for members of the media to make about a particular call or a particular game, and that has its own corrosive impact.
I agree. A couple more before I let you go. This is for the lightning round.
Anything.
I want this. Well, I don't know. I thought that when Adam got rid of and the players decided that the Donald Sterling tape and the racism that was apparent it was a no-brainer, and that you'd make him sell. There was a part of me that when I drilled down on it and I read more, that he had a problem with housing discrimination, and it was clear that. And to me, I understand it wasn't the purview of the NBA at the time to take on somebody. I mean, you could have taken on the Oklahoma City owners for fracking, but I guess what I'm getting at is I felt like that was such an egregious sort of almost racism in court documents, and I'm wondering why
it's changed.
Why we let them.
It has changed now because we were aware of the investigation. We had our own file, but the United States of America settled with him without the admission of guilt. And so being the lawyer that I am, we saw Allen Iverson stopped on the New Jersey Turnpike doing 95 miles an hour, but our view was that's what was alleged. But we waited for trial, of which there was none because it was adjudicated in anticipation of dismissal in some way. There used to be a thing called due process. Now, because of the advent of digital lynch mobs,
that's what they are. Digital lynch mobs.
They put pressure on leagues to do something based upon accusations. I remember one case in particular. I remember a player of the San Francisco 49ers was alleged to have committed a domestic violence offense.
Yeah.
And the outrage expressed, why is he playing this Sunday with that accusation? Well, it turns out that the accusation was false. It was withdrawn. It never happened, apparently. But the pressure on commissioners of all leagues to do something, shall I say, prematurely, without the process playing out, is intense. And it's hard. So there you go.
So you don't regret not getting rid of Donald Sterling earlier?
Well, I kind of, he obviously was I actually recommended a fine when he just bought the club.
Yeah.
Because he said, I know what to do. You have to lose in order to win.
Yeah.
He denied he ever said it. We confronted him with the tape where we heard him saying it. This is after he swore on his dead mother's grave or something. And we fined him. But of course, nowadays, that's what tanking is about, which is, I think, it goes right to the integrity of the league and the game. I think it's terrible. But we step up in some ways to become stronger, and we intervene in some ways, and in other ways we make excuses for our teams. It's a very troubling subject, actually. Because we're supposed to be teaching, and that's why we go to other countries. Nelson Mandela said that sports brings us together, and I think that that's what Adam has been quoted as saying as well. And that's embedded in our approach. It really is. It may sound a little naive, but it's really quite interesting. So we negotiated with Russia to get Volkov, with the Soviet Union to get Volkov out. We negotiated with China to get Yao out. And so we had our own, we negotiated with Iran in order to get, I forget his name, the 7'2" center. Hamedi?
Oh, yeah, Hamedi.
Okay,
he couldn't really play.
Well, but he was 7'2", and he had some moves, and Iran was the Asian champion, and they wanted to come to our summer league. And through FIBA and through the Secretary of State, with the permission of the Secretary of State, we invited the Iranian basketball team to play in the Utah Summer League. I mean, go figure that one out. And with the permission of the governor, of Senator Hatch, of the owner of the Jazz, we said, okay, this is a thing to bring people together.
Yeah.
And so that tells you what our history and what's in our DNA.
Well, and that's what bothered me about the whole China thing, was that there was a revisionist history that the NBA really was kowtowing to China and hadn't ever taken a social stand or anything. That's what I hated about it. They minimized the accomplishments.
No, do you know that we had to get permission from the Treasury Department for Ahmedi?
I didn't know that.
I'm pronouncing
because
he's on the. Iran was on the state-sponsored terrorism list, and you had to get special permission. There was once a 7'8" North Korean player that sort of didn't pan out because he wasn't that good.
He didn't even play in the pickup games with Rodman over there. Right, he must have been awful.
Correct. He must have been awful. So there you go. And it's kind
of... You never got Oscar out of Brazil,
by
Oscar
the way,
Schmidt.
No, but it's interesting that the highest-ranking American for a period of time that had met with Kim Jong-un was Dennis Rodman.
I mean,
okay?
yeah.
And you know what? Should the New York Philharmonic not have gone to North Korea? I remember because we thought about it.
It's a tough one.
Well,
I don't know.
Well, go ahead. I'm turning the tables on you.
Yeah.
Answer that question. I actually had looked into whether we could make arrangements for the U.S. national team, which was playing in Seoul on its way to the World Championships in Japan, whether we wanted them to go visit North Korea.
What year was this?
I forget whatever the world champs were. It was probably 2006, 2010.
Yeah.
So, and I actually talked to former Secretary Bill Richardson, the UN ambassador, and he said, it was before Kim Jong-un, he said, there's interest on the other side. And then I said, it's just going to get to be too difficult. So you
looked into it.
I looked into it, and I was a little bit chagrined when the symphony orchestra went because I considered basketball to be the cultural equivalent of the New York Philharmonic. And so I think that's what Adam is talking about when he raises the issue of basketball bringing people together.
Yeah. Irrespective of the government's differences, its philosophies, that if we can take this game and show what it means, that's a bridge.
Secretary Condoleezza Rice said to me was that anything we can do that's people to people, we're all in.
Okay.
Even if the government of Iran, for example, is railing against America.
Yeah.
And that gave a little dimension to me of what we were trying to accomplish. They said, even at the worst hours, let's stay in touch people to people. Because there was a great article in ESPN, it must have been 20 years ago, about Americans playing in Iran. With all of these restrictions about alcohol and dress and everything else, they would get their Iranian counterpart, men and women, they'd pull down the shades and they'd party drinking alcoholic beverages, etc. So it's just kind of interesting that people use the game to break down barriers.
And you've done that better than anybody. You mentioned the social digital lynch mobs and all the things that have become of what media is. I remember when being a classically trained journalist, having my life made when the New York Times hired me, there was a certain way in which we went about our jobs. And it was obviously, if you were an opinion maker, you sought out the reporting to buttress your opinion. But more than that, if you were a reporter and you were covering the league like I was, you weighed both sides. You made determinations. You certainly made your calls.
Doesn't happen now.
Yeah, I feel like it's almost toxic. And these are people that I grew up with. Some of them called me for jobs they wanted at the New York Times at the time. And I look at what our business has become. It's almost become toxic, where someone told me recently that I'm very close to. He said there's an unholy alliance right now between teams and a few media sources in which people used to break stories in the local markets because they worked their butts off and they worked their asses off covering those teams. And nowadays, those stories are giving to these national outlets because of fear that they're going to have something bad written about them. I thought, what kind of frickin' media environment is that?
Yeah, well, that's...
And a couple of savaged you, by the way. And I've been I've defended you, even though you've been an asshole at times to different people. You've been a very shocker. I know.
I would never. What kind of language is that to use?
You're right. You're right. And this, the great thing is,
you're right. I understand it completely.
Yeah.
But, and your former newspaper is, in my view, is fallen on very difficult times.
Clearly.
Because I see certain reporters that focus on issues, but they only see it in one way. And it goes both ways. It isn't conservative versus liberal, just whatever their perspective is. And they're allowed to do it, and there's no one editing what they're doing or overseeing
this. It's a content thing where they just don't care. They just want content. It's sort of, what the old wooden thing. Activity doesn't equal achievement.
Okay. Did we just finish the lightning round?
No. This is the lightning round's right after this. I know you.
You better hurry up.
Yeah. So what I wanted to get at is there anything that really bothers you about the media today, or any certain writer, any certain?
No.
Okay.
Nothing. It just the fact that I know what I'm going to read in the New York Times editorial page, and I know what I'm going to read in the Wall Street Journal editorial page. I know what I'm going to see on MSNBC. I know what I'm going to see on Fox. I yearn for the day when there wasn't a point of view that permeated everything. I tried watching Al Jazeera for a while, but that didn't help me either. I don't speak Arabic.
It's all advocacy journalism.
Yes.
It's advocacy journalism, and there's people take you don't even take the destination sometimes anymore because you know where. So you don't take the journey because you know where the destination's going to be.
Correct.
This is great, by the way. Just catching up with you. If these microphones weren't here, I would feel the same way. I don't know how you feel.
Me too. Same way.
Okay. The lightning round. Well, let's see. Bringing the game together, bringing people together. It's been one of your great legacies through the game. Obviously, your job was to make money for the owners, but you almost had to me, and I don't want to be too blowing smoke and saying all these nice things about you, but I felt like you had a double bottom line. Like, we have to make ourselves accountable to what our owners want to make and the value of our franchises going up, but we also have an opportunity to give back and show what this game means. I look at the race thing in the NBA and what it's become. Larry Bird and Billy Hunter, it must have been 15 years ago, the former executive director of the Players Union, said this game, to really be what it's going to be, needs another American-born white superstar. I don't agree with that anymore. I think some of these guys are so crossover that, and I don't know if it's society or how the game's marketed, but I don't necessarily feel like, that even though the white player has disappeared except for the foreign player that's white, American-born white player in many ways, I don't think it matters.
It doesn't, and I'm not going to claim credit for electing Barack Obama, but It was interesting to note that if you have game, you get the starting role, and that's what happens. And I remember when certain members of the media suggested that the reason I was so intent on international expansion was to keep the league white, which is becoming laughable, especially since the number of players from Africa is going to continue to increase. We got very talented players. Mutombo and Elijah Line. Oh, my God.
Oh, there's a guy that just got out of Maryland. He's the first player from Angola that's going to be in the NBA. And I said, the first thing you got to do is go give Charles Barkley grief about elbowing your national team player at the 92 Dream Team.
He wanted to show the brother what life was like in the hood or something like that. I remember his statement, and that's really wonderful. Thank you, Charles. That's very good.
Yeah, so I just look at that. But I look at some of the germination of that when it started. The whole Russell Auerbach pairing and what that meant to the league back in the day. And Boston obviously getting
it was a great statement. It was about, if you're talented, you can not only be a player, you can be a player coach, you could be a coach. I mean, that's how Russell accumulated the last couple of his championship rings, and it's a wonderful thing. If you got game, you're in the game. If you don't have game, I mean, we had members of your esteemed media colleagues who used to say, do I think that having so many, quote, foreign players was going to turn off our fans? And I turned to that guy and said, where are you from? He said, I'm from New Jersey. I said, no, you're not. Where are you really from? Where were you, and we all trace back to being from someplace. Ireland, Germany, Poland, Hungary, Russia, and that's the great thing about sports. We're all from someplace, and this shows it. And when you see Luol Deng, who, played as from the UK but came out of a refugee camp in Sudan, you begin to understand that the movement and equality are two good things.
Lightning round. This was great. We did this when you retired. I don't remember your last press conference. We went back and forth, and you had fun with it, but. I think for our purposes, the frozen envelope that was there picked out so Patrick Ewing could go to the Knicks. Tell people why that did happen, how it happened.
When I said to Jim Rome, when he asked me the same question, if he was still beating his wife, he got very offended and upset. I said, are you still beating your wife, Mike?
Yeah, that's
like you can't. I actually it's either.
Was he actually charged with domestic violence?
No, of course not. I was just that's the
it's
old
sort of like
joke
going into
about,
still
beating your wife.
Yeah.
There's no way.
I was like, I would have never went on the Rome is Burning show back in the day if I knew
that's
that.
Right.
Okay.
Well, no. But that's it. But
okay, good.
I'd say it's frozen. It was heated. It was bent. I don't even. There were so many theories, but. It's available on YouTube, so you should watch it.
You want every game to go 7 games, and
right.
And you've made that clear to every officiating crew before game 5 or 6.
Yeah, it's funny. The only time I ever spoke to an official about a game or any game or rule was I said to one official, you got to call defensive 3. You can't just get it out of your repertoire. That's not fair to the game.
You got to call the
defensive 3.
Defensive 3 seconds,
yes,
right?
We had one official of blessed memory who now retired.
Who was it?
He is now a deacon in the Catholic Church.
He had another calling than refereeing? What?
Yeah, well,
that's blasphemy.
In between, he's a television personality too. I said, you got Steve Javi. I said,
Steve Javi.
You got to call defensive 3s, please.
Yeah.
You're making us look bad. Either if you have a rule, you got to enforce it. Stop it.
And I was always of the opinion that, superstars got better calls. Well,
yeah.
No, guys that have been in the league that are very good have relationships, and it's human nature to give that person the benefit of the doubt before the rookie.
We analyzed everything up the wazoo and never found a correlation.
Yeah.
I know them all. The rookies don't get the breaks.
Yeah, the largest one that I wanted to address, and I'll get it before you might say it on your deathbed. I might dig it up before then. You suspended Michael Jordan because of gambling.
We were sitting in my living room, said someone on ESPN.
Yeah.
And my wife said, where was I if he was here? I said, I must have...
Who was in your living room?
Michael
Jordan.
When he came over.
And
they said that's when Stern told him he had to leave the league.
He had to leave the league because of his gambling problems.
That's funny. I mean, that's what happens when people ask questions, because Bob Costas asked me, well, what about this gambling? I said, Bob, how big is your mortgage? Well, that's different. Why? Because, you don't want to owe money to gamblers. Well, what about your mortgage? And so, I don't know.
So this was you felt almost personally insulted because, so to this day, Michael Jordan retired to go play baseball. He retired for his own reasons, whatever they were.
Question, he was.
At no point did you put any pressure on him.
No, gosh, no. He was our most valuable player. Was leaving our league, and I went there and said, it's great. If he has the wherewithal to do that, he should follow his dream.
I think LeBron's a better player than Michael, but what do you think?
I'm not getting into that.
God dang it. What about...
Actually, Mike, they're different personalities. Michael was the most wicked competitor. He pushed his teammates to such a level.
Oh, look at the Hall of Fame speech. That was the real Michael.
Okay.
Pettiness.
No, I don't want to say he was petty. I think he had a couple before he gave the speech, but that's a separate issue.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Okay, but I just think that made him a great player and made his teams great teams.
Yeah. LeBron, just a different. He grew up much differently.
Yes.
Last thing, this
promise.
Yes. Yeah, I know because this has been pulling nails for you.
Another call.
By the way, I got to thank you. When Gilbert Arenas was suspended for all those games, one of my most proud moments in the Washington Post office was, on one line, Gilbert Arenas was calling and saying, what is he going to do? And on the other line, you were on the phone going, I got to suspend him for the season. That was so big. I think my boss just gave me a raise because of my Q rating at that moment. But the bottom line is, you said to me, tell Gilbert I like him. He's a good guy. I still have to suspend him for all these games. That's kind of how you went about life. You didn't hate the guy. No. You just felt like he was...
Do what you have to do. That's what it was. Because there was something bigger than all of us, and it's called the game.
The Mike Wise Show is a presentation of Pure Hoops Media.